What are the potential economic benefits of transitioning to a more sustainable and circular economy?
Yeah, it's a good question.
In 2015, the UK government introduced a plastic bag charge, an initiative aimed at addressing litter and waste concerns. Almost 8 years on, I think it's time for a review. I'm Kamal, Aziz, and this is Bagged.
A mountain of bags, but the 5p charges have shrunk it. Here, a drop of
It cannot eat because its stomach is full of plastic.
Single-use plastic bags came into force 3 years ago.
Recycling is instead being dumped there and in some cases burnt.
In England could double to 10 pence under new government proposals. Under the plans, the charge could be extended to smaller retailers who are currently exempt. Schools are also being urged to end the consumption of single-use plastics.
£5 charge was introduced on the 5th of October 2015 and quickly made its presence known in the retail landscape all over the UK. Its primary objective was to reduce plastic consumption, promote sustainable practices and mitigate the environmental harm caused by their disposal. Analysing the data reveals a notable decline in plastic bag sales from major retailers as a result. Between 2015 and 2020, these retailers witnessed an 86% decrease in bag sales, and then this downward trend continued, with bag sales dropping by an impressive 94% in 2022. These statistics indicate that the government policy was largely successful. In 2020, a significant milestone was reached when the charge increased from 5p to 10p across all retailers. This adjustment aimed to further discourage the use of single-use plastic bags, encouraging consumers to adopt reusable alternatives and reconsider their consumption habits. DEFRA, which is the Department for Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs, released a report stating that the charge was increased to 10p and extended to all businesses, and this has helped to further bring the number of bags used down by over 20%, from 627 million in 2019 to 2020 to 496 million in 2021 to 2022. Also, by increasing the charge to 10p and extending this to all retailers, estimations were made over 10 years on the effect of this change. These effects include an expected overall benefit of over £331 million to the UK economy, an overall reduction of 21% in the number of carrier bags supplied across all bag types, reduced numbers of single-use carrier bags issued by small and medium retailers by 80%. But of course, these are just predictions and they'll have to be assessed in the future. But I think most people would agree that this is steps in the right direction. It's a good dog. Talking of steps in the right direction, in 2019, Environment Secretary Theresa Villiers said, "Our landmark environmental bill is intended to lead to a green transformation that will help our country to thrive, positioning the UK as a world leader on building a more circular economy." £5 charge on plastic carry bags is a great example of government policy making a real difference to our environment. But we want to go further, and this power will enable us to consider applying a similar charge to other single-use plastic items. And now we're seeing more of these promises being kept. At the start of 2023, DEFRA informed us of a ban on many more single-use plastic items being sold in shops, such as plastic plates, trays, bowls, cutlery, balloon sticks, and certain types of polystyrene cups and food containers. It's supposedly coming into effect in October of this year, with some multiple significant policies coming into place in the UK. It does inspire hope that the government will be able to reach their environmental goals on time. DEFRA's self-proclaimed ambitious goals include working towards our ambition of zero avoidable waste by 2050 and working to a target of eliminating avoidable plastic waste by the end of 2042. So we're spending all this money on plastic bags now when we're shopping, but where does this money actually go? Well, the allocation of the proceeds from the charge varies across different regions of the United Kingdom. In England, Wales and Scotland, retailers have the discretion to determine how they utilise the funds. While there is strong encouragement from the government to support good causes, the decision ultimately rests with the retailers. However, in Northern Ireland, regulations require that the proceeds must be directed to the government. This information left me thinking, well, who is more capable of taking on the responsibility of putting this money to good use? Is it the government or is it the retailers and the charities? I brought this question to Dr. David Oliver to hear his thoughts on this.
Okay, hi, my name is David Oliver. Shall I start again?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, my name is Dr. David Oliver and I'm a catchment scientist at the University of Stirling in biological and environmental sciences. My research interests are in catchment science, exploring the interactions between land, water, and people. And do I think it's better that the money goes to government as a sort of tax, or is it better that it goes to good causes? So I think there are some kind of what if things there. So if the organisations that saw the bags were definitely sending it to whatever charities it is or good causes that are going to kind of deal with environmental stuff, then great. You know that it's happening on the ground. We know that doesn't always happen. So maybe going to government at the moment is better. But again, where does it go from there? If it's going to go into environmental policy, then great. If it's going to get lost into the mix, then I don't know if you can argue which one is better.
Let's imagine all the money that went to the government for the environmental causes was put into environmental causes in the same way all the money was put into charities. What organisation do you think is capable and dedicated enough to put in the work?
Well, I mean, you have to hope that the best organisation there is the organisation that is basically tasked with protecting the environment for us, and that would be the environmental regulators, whether that's in England or in Wales or in Scotland or in Northern Ireland. That's who you would like to think has that kind of responsibility. So in the case of Scotland, you'd be looking at someone like the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, and lots of the environmental regulators around the world at the moment, and certainly in the UK, are facing, big financial pressures. They're being cut back to the bone, and getting additional money to sort of look at issues around plastic pollution and things like that would obviously be a very welcome contribution from government, I think. So they would benefit, and I think we could hold them as being the people who are responsible for it. But don't take from that it would be an easy job. I think managing plastics in the environment is pretty challenging. So, that wouldn't be an easy task.
Changing consumer attitude towards plastic bags with a charge without removing the freedom of convenience by charging too high or banning outright has been a very effective way of cutting down consumption and waste, as well as being a highly popular decision from the public. This consensus comes from scholars and analysts who focused on this subject. For example, in 2019, a scholar called Gregory Thomas wrote a paper on the charge and stated, "Mandatory charges are not only effective in reducing plastic bag use, they also appear to be popular among the public. Support for a carry bag charge in Wales was already high before it was introduced and increased even further after. A similar bag charge introduced in the Republic of Ireland in 2002 has been described as the most popular tax in Europe." Plastic bags, notorious for their slow degradation and potential harm to wildlife, have long been a concern. The plastic bag charge aims to address this issue by reducing their presence in our towns, in our parks, and our countryside. By discouraging their use, it strives to minimise the environmental impact associated with these bags. While exploring the many effects of plastic waste being present in our environment, I was particularly interested in what the impacts of this waste had on the public. Due to the additives and pollutants found in many plastics, high waste increases the chance of cancer and hormone alterations, affecting reproduction and growth. However, Dr. Oliver explains some further impacts to human health.
There's also hazards associated with public health. So if you think about wastewater treatment plants, the microplastics that come through those systems, they have been in very close contact with lots of bacteria and viruses that are associated with the waste that's in our gut, and we use wastewater treatment plants to get rid of our human waste. And so there's a real opportunity for the plastics to interact with microorganisms. And certainly a lot of the work that we've been doing at Stirling is quite interested in how plastics provide a habitat for microorganisms to attach to the plastics, to colonize the plastics. We can ask questions then about how that enhances their survivability, their persistence, their ecology. So these microorganisms live on plastics and then move through a catchment, through the river corridor, end up at a bathing beach, wash up on the sand, and then you as a beach goer who perhaps doesn't want to go in the water because in the UK it's relatively cold, you'll hang around on the beach, and it's there where you may actually be exposed to some pretty nasty bacteria or viruses that come out of a wastewater treatment plant and end up, accumulating on beaches. And certainly if you go to beaches in the Firth of Forth, you'll find, if you look closely enough, little plastic pellets called nurdles, and there are thousands and millions of them around. And if you look behind the shoreline, behind the vegetation, you'll see them trapped where they've been washed ashore. And they are hooching with E. coli. They're covered in E. coli. So we've done an analysis on them, and the E. coli can survive on that plastic. If you think about kids going to the beaches, and this is not about scaremongering, but if you think about kids and the kinds of things that they like to pick up, colourful little plastic nurdles is something that, you know, that kids can get on their hands, and then of course they put the nurdle down, but what they got on their hand, and then they eat an ice cream. So there's a public health kind of angle to this too when you think about plastics that needs to be considered. So, you know, the plastic itself isn't a cause of disease, but in the wastewater treatment plant, it comes into contact with viruses that can then jump onto the plastic and use it like a raft to then maybe go a little bit further than it would in a current if it was just floating along as a virus particle or a bacterial cell. When I mentioned E. coli earlier, so E. coli itself doesn't cause disease. It's in you and I, in our gut, and you know it's just a normal gut bacteria, but it's used as an indicator so that the more fecal bacteria like E. coli you detect in the environment, the bigger the chance something more sinister might be there. And it's used for policy and regulation like the Bathing Waters Directive. So we're just saying that plastics can enhance the potential for these E. coli to live longer.
Not only are there consequences to human life, it also impacts the lives of animals, especially aquatic animals, with at least 14 million tons of plastic ending up in the ocean every year, and plastic making up 80% of all debris found in the ocean. The impacts are widespread and detrimental.
You know, these TV documentaries that document the sort of plight of plastics, and you know, these poor animals that have just got entangled in, you know, whether it's old fishing kind of materials that are heavily plastic linked, or other bits of plastic from human consumption that have suddenly got into an environment where they shouldn't be, and these animals are starting to get really kind of caught up in those materials. Those are the sort of immediate concerns that you see. But as I said, you know, there are smaller organisms, you know, maybe the ones that are less sort of likeable and less fluffy, but equally, you know, they're ingesting these very small bits of plastic, you know, through grazing through bed sediments in streams. Yeah, I'm talking about very small kind of, you know, invertebrates and things like this. You know, they're feeding on bed sediments and taking in very small bits of plastic into their guts too. We don't know what the ultimate consequences of that might be, but obviously it's plastic getting into places where it really shouldn't be.
I also wanted to hear Dr. Oliver's thoughts on the ban of certain plastic products being introduced in England in 2023. And here's what he had to say. In October this year, they're talking about banning certain single-use plastics altogether in England, plates and food containers and things like that. Do you think banning is more fair and a better way to reduce plastic waste than to try to influence consumer behaviour?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think it's a really difficult question, isn't it? Because there are lots of different arguments and sides to this story, I suppose. If you look at the sort of UK population, there will be very divergent views across different communities about what they think is fair in answer to what's being proposed. And I think there will be circumstances where, you know, certain types of single-use plastics can be beneficial to some folk, but an outright ban might be seen as sort of overly harsh. Personally, I think plastic is an absolute nightmare. You know, when I get given single-use plastic sort of things to use, I kind of, you know, I try to avoid it as much as I can, but it's so difficult. I think if we did ban, you know, all kinds of plastics, I think people would adapt to it. Look at how we've adapted to paying for carrier bags. You know, at the time that came in, you know, paying for a single-use carrier bag was seen as, you know, it was such a big change to when you used to just get it for free. So the movement to banning, you know, may bring about lots of disagreements and disgruntlement with folk, but it may, you know, ease the path for implementation, given that we've gone through the sort of charging period. I don't know if I've answered your question particularly well there, but I think it's a really great question, but it's such a kind of word. Yeah.
With the news of this ban coming into public, there's been mixed views on it. And the government's announcement of this ban, Environment Secretary Therese Coffey claimed, "I am proud of our efforts in this area. Following with, these new single-use plastic bans will continue our vital work to protect the environment for future generations." Yet the ambitious and positive response to the introduction of this ban has not been reciprocated by all those concerned with it. For example, the Guardian news outlet released an article stating that the new ban barely scratches the surface of a problem that has been known about for decades and is now out of control. Charities also had sceptical views on this new ban. Green Alliance, an environmental charity operating in England, claimed that this ban isn't dealing with the main plastic problems and that the claims are overblown.
Well, I mean, the answer to the question here is that there are steps in the right direction.
Yeah.
whether or not they will enable them to actually reach those targets is another thing. And presumably, there will be an eye on how that is moving forward as we go through, similar to how the governments in Scotland and England and the other nations have looked at municipal waste management and stuff going to landfill. There have been progressive targets, and we've looked at how we're doing. I think for plastics, it will be a similar thing. We will keep an eye on how that's going, but there's certainly steps in the right direction to try and get there. Banning of plastics, I think, is definitely a move in the right direction. There's been lots of movements around getting rid of microbeads in things like cosmetics and things like this, and getting rid of that so that it doesn't go through wastewater treatment plants is definitely a move in the right direction. And banning other types of single-use plastics, I think, will be, it will make a difference. Whether it's enough to get it over the line by those dates, let's wait and see.
After spending months looking into plastic waste, pollution and health concerns surrounding plastics, it is clear that this issue is widespread and dangerous for both humans and the environment we live in. The UK has clearly contributed in cutting down these risks and has made progress in becoming a cleaner and healthier country, but I'm left feeling inconclusive. While the plastic bag charge has absolutely had a positive change, the size of the problem suggests it could be too late to balance the scales. And maybe the government's targets are too ambitious if we continue to consume and dump so much waste into our environment. If legislation in the future is as successful as the bag levy, then the amount of waste may continue to drop drastically, but with the damage we cause, it barely scratches the surface. We have found that the proceeds of this levy might be more in the interest of corporate profit as opposed to being aimed primarily at regulators and charities. There are sides to take, goods and bads, actions and consequences. However, we are all responsible.